Well, secondly is I'm gonna go in and put everyone on mute. And of course, come off mute to speak, but for now, just keep the noise down to a dull roar. It does get distracting sometimes when dogs bark or doorbells ring or whatever else. And recording is going, so Bishop,
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, and good evening to everyone here at the hall at Christ Church Gananoque. It's great to see the folks in person, and also great to see all the folks up on the screen with us tonight for the second of our diocesan financial consultations. So just as we meeting tonight, and then another, we come ever closer to our Episcopal election tomorrow, and we'll be into a whole nother phase of this. So we'll offer a prayer for the next few weeks for us as a diocese as we gather. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving in this glorious season of Easter for the gift of new life brought into the world through the resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ, for the mission and ministry to which he has called his disciples in the world, both then and now, and for the power of the Spirit that draws us together, strengthens, encourages us, and uplifts us for the future that lies before us. I ask you to be with all those gathered tonight here as we consider the way forward in our diocese, particularly related to our financial consultation tonight. Give us clear minds and give us the ability to reach out in love for one another for the building up of your kingdom in this place. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Prayers we prepare for the Episcopal election. Gracious God, through this slow season of waiting, keep us mindful of your promises. Busyness of our many preparations, remind us to savor the joy of your abiding presence. As we move toward the goal of good and godly decisions, may our hearts and minds be attentive to the guidance of your Spirit. In our questions and conversations, may we listen carefully and speak the truth in love. Then may your Spirit lead us to choose a shepherd for our diocese, one who will lead, love, and serve among us. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Bishop, I'll slides up here. So tonight is the fall last meeting, and so for tonight, there's a couple of objectives for you here, so where's my gonna feedback what we heard, and we'll talk about how that was heard. Information. Provide some clarity around what, again, we've had questions around what it is and why it is, and what's next in the steps in that, and then finally further discussion. And so again, one of the things, and this will come through in some of the comments in that, but one of the things is just to remind us, we are working together. Right? I mean, we all have opinions, we all have sometimes strong opinions, and sometimes things are a little different than we were talking just a moment ago about a service club or other things. We are called into a different space. We are called by a different faith. Does kind of some of the commentary got a little bit out of hand, and I suggest that perhaps might want to look inward, to make sure that what you're saying is in fact, and how it's said is what you would want to say in the community that we are part of. So just a reminder that we are working in faith, and we are working together. I think, I've always been a fan of quotes. So, again, one of the standard ones in the world of planning, the goal without a plan is the way. And so it's fine for how we talk about, we wish things were different, or we wish this was, but how do we put a plan together that makes that something more than just something we wish for? The second one, and I had no idea when I was fishing around my usual places, and I thought that St. Francis of Assisi was actually a bit of a philosopher. And I suspect that's a paraphrase. But start by doing what's necessary. Then what's possible. Suddenly, you're doing the impossible. And I think that the quote, I rather took the quote because it is very much start with what is the necessary things, the things, if you look back to like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, things you need like shelter, water, and food, right? And then as you rise up, you get to the things that are now possible. And then finally to the things that you didn't think were. So I wanted to just spend a moment up front talking about some terminology and making sure we have clarity. So a budget, we have budgets at home, we have budgets at church, we have budgets at work, we have just about any organization that's involved with money. Budget. Budget's a financial tool, and at the end of it, the really gets into what are the resources you have available to spend on what you're trying to do. It's specific to a focused window, time window. Generally, that's a year, whether it's a calendar year or a fiscal year. The diocese, of course, and all of our churches, I'm not aware of any church that does not have a calendar fiscal year. Right? You can set other things, but we're all on an annual calendar basis. And because it's a year window, it targets short-term objectives. Budget speak, you are normally down to objectives. These are specifics that we're trying to address with that, right? We are trying to X. And then finally, is a budget by definition, and again, because of the window, factors in immediacy, but it factors in, in a given year, you only have so many resources. So even if someone left us $10 million tomorrow, it's a matter of how fast could you figure out, you decide I want to build this as a thing or a building, whatever. It would take time to be able to build that, time to figure it out. It would take time to be able, if you wanted to close something and shut it down, that takes time. You have to reflect that there are limitations, that we have to deal with. If you're dealing with buildings, you can't just walk away and say, okay, that doesn't cost me anything. You have to go through holding it, getting it cleared to sell, getting through the sales process. If you're looking to change staff or reduce the numbers of people, that can't be done without implications liable. You have to pay services. There's a number of things that within a window become limiting factors, right? And then time itself. And one of the biggest things, certainly for us, is the availability of human capital. Because we have in our churches and at the diocesan level, fewer and fewer people that are engaged in the work. So all those things are factors that are brought very clear in the short term. When you look at a multi-year plan, Again, passing this through the lens of finance. It is the same. It is the tool that helps show where you're gonna spend your resources to achieve what you're trying to do. Usually a longer time window, 3 to 5 years. Instead of objectives, they talk more about goals and direction. This is where we're trying to head. This is what we're trying to achieve at the goal level. And objectives are a layer below that. Because it's a longer time period and because there's more resources over the number of years, you have more flexibility in adjusting things. Whether that's resources, whether it's addressing your limitations, and whether you're trying to build things on. One of the things that takes time is innovation. Right? Creativity and innovation typically take time. Typically takes cycles to develop. Typically take, let's try this and then see how it works and then adjust. Let's learn from it. But they too take time. And change. Change takes both time to change and change management. I think pretty well any church that I've been in, there's been a classic case of somebody trying to change something, didn't do a very good job of managing the change. Ultimately, it wasn't what they tried to do, it's how it was changed that becomes the factor. So change management and change planning become very important. Of course, one of the things, and this is the chart you saw, those that were with us the last meeting, there are things changing around Senate. The timing of Senate, right? The Senate is every 2 years, and we're now, this year it's going to be in the spring. Number of reasons for that, right? But it is in the spring. There's a lot of positives to that. We will be able to meet, rather than in a hotel, we'll be able to meet in a much more cost-effective venue. A venue that's designed for the type of meetings we're gonna have. The weather is better, the light is better for those that are driving. You know, there's a whole lot of reasons that a spring Senate has some advantages. This Senate is very much about mission. And, you know, Bishop Susan Bell, very much about becoming a mission-shaped diocese. And then, of course, as always, it's said there is the governance piece, and we continue to see the not-for-profit legislation branch out to describe how governance has to look. Even though we get a bit of a flexibility with it, it is still a matter of we have to ensure that the intent of the law, not always the letter, is being met. And of course, the bishop just prayed, but we will see a leadership change. God willing, in 2 weeks' time, we'll elect a new bishop. And somewhere in the coming months, that new bishop will, he or she will take seat. And that will start change. And then finally, we're, you know, governing the resources we have to change. So just a bit of graphic to talk about how we have moved through things previously. So we do a budget every year. The budget, and again, for clarity, the budget for 2023 was approved by Senate Council last November. Right, that's so we have a budget this year. Right, when the new bishop is seated, whether that's in June or September, whatever, there's a budget for the diocese in place. Right, and that's already there. What we did was, the way we have done it is that in the years when there's a Senate, the budget is drawn to Senate. The years not Senate Council approves it. But each budget period, and those are actually picket fences, that's the graphic I came up with, but each one is separately. You start a year, you complete the year, and then we then have another round of discussions about what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to get to? What's going to be required? What's the different groups going to need? What's the priorities? But each one is each year is a separate piece, new piece of work. So they're fenced. So the model we're talking to says that the synod will be presented with a framework. And that's a multi-year framework that synod would then approve. And that would be what we're recommending is a 3-year. So if you just think about how that works, so if you just use 2023 synod as the anchor point, that means that you present a 3-year plan, which would be 24, 25, and 26. And then synod would meet again, and then synod council would do the budget for 2024, 2025, and 26, within what synod has approved as a framework. But then synod would meet again in 2025. So you actually never fully get to that year because you're on a 2-year cycle with synod. So that 3rd year will always be that shift in the back piece. But those 2 inside years, it's going to set the boundaries and the framework and the goals for what comes next. Of course, the other common factor in this is the consultation across all the pieces. So both the frame building the longer term plan and building the budget would have the consultation process, which we've used through this, which is, having sessions like this. And we'll talk some more about that the back end. But the consultation piece is part of that stitches the whole thing together. And again, using what is fairly standard process, which is, trying to drive things where you set goals and objectives, develop a framework from that, measure against that, and both on the financial side, and you measure performance and progress. That's something I would argue we're not particularly good at. We've not, we generally don't spend a lot of time reflecting on, we can certainly reflect on the financials, but we generally don't spend a ton working through how we done against what we said we wanted to achieve. So the concept would then be again to try and put more of that into place. So I'm not going to go through these again. These are the same slides that were in the package the last time. This is just to remind everybody the categories, because I'm going to provide feedback from what we heard. So we asked questions around our churches. We asked questions around our shared ministry as a diocese. We asked questions around beyond our borders. So here, and these are the areas within these that the questions centered in on. Finance, admin support work, and this is through the lens of the diocesan financial picture. So this is not necessarily saying worried about the given churches, but this is providing financials to the church, being able to provide financial guidance, being able, one of the common questions here is when can you provide bookkeeping? When can you, so there's all those types of things. The HR, legal and regulatory things. We talked about a number of things there, but we have an increasing number of churches that get into challenges with employees. And whether that's simple things like, well, we've always given so-and-so a honorarium. Is that got to be reported for tax? And there's multiple answers to that question. We've decided that we can't afford fill in the blank, an organist, another musician, an administrator, sexton, whatever it is. We have when people then get into issues, we have a human rights complaint percolating through from vaccination policies. You get into things where people don't get along. The warden makes a comment to an employee and that gets. So there's a lot of things and is that world. And then things like the bereavement authority, those are all the pieces that are in there. Communications and networking. And again, the concept there of communication is not going to be a one-way thing. Networking be done across churches, within churches. We learn something in the communication space through this process. talk about that in a few minutes. But again, how we then network, so everything doesn't flow through the diocese. Parish ministry, liturgy, and pastoral care. And how that passes from a diocesan financial lens. Programs, community service, and ministry. And finally, facilities and asset management. So the other second area was around shared diocesan ministry. Cathedral, ministry of the cathedral, justice and peace. As we talked, we do have a commission there that is joint with the Archdiocese. A refugee support through our Doors Committee program, and creation care, which, you know, is headlined by the Green Book. Beyond our borders, we have three places that go beyond us. That's our national church, General Synod Proportional Gift, Ecclesiastical Province of Ontario, and National Indigenous Ministry, which we've now begun to fund through the tithe that we do through our new ministry fund. Our ministry allocation as we sell properties. So, just to give you to shift, that's just to sort of reframe what we did. Here's the numerics. There were more people in Napanee, but only 7 turned in a paper. We have people that were with us in Napanee had the opportunity to turn in a paper form. We got 7. From those that were online during the meeting that participated in the polls run through Teams at the time, there was 31 people that submitted there. Again, more on the call, but not all participated. And then post meeting, we put it up on the website and communicated that. And another 12 people that went online and answered the same questions through that. And that did present a challenge. There was some people made comments around, it's hard for some people to understand it. We did assume that people would read they would watch the video because that gave the context. So, and I think it's clear that if you tried to do it without the context of the video, it would have been different. So in total, there was actually north of 60 people participated. Just do the raw count. There was 50 that actually provided submission. A little bit of variance here and there. Some people didn't answer all the questions. Some people provided detailed comments. Some people provided nothing. We are a diverse diocese. So just a little bit in terms of the what some of this said. What I've done is I left the questions in the same order for continuity. But what we have done is through 2 things using standard methodology. One is to do weighting. Simply put, that's saying that if you answer, if that particular question was rated as a top, then that's assigned 3 points. Question was rated as high, it got 2 points. If it was medium low, it got 1 point. If it got not applicable or didn't answer, it gets 0. And then you work through your weighted totals. As well, we looked at preference. For those that are into the federal proportional representation type thing, we also lined it up with that type of approach. And did so to line that up. So when you amalgamate the 2, here's what you got. As people were asked, what influences the global influences on the life of our diocese over the next 3 years? Number 1, and when I put the term clear, that means it's a clear number 1. It's well advanced for anything else. The demographics was clearly number 1, okay, which reflects the demographics of our churches. Number 2 and 3 were a little closer together, and I've marked that way. Number 2 was the economy, inflation, particular. Number 3, around community needs. Number 4, well back, world events. Number 5, government and regulatory. So that's how they ranked out on those questions. When we looked at individual church needs, same exact process. Number 1 and number 2 were actually fairly close together. So I marked them that way. Number 1 was programs, community service, and do ministry. Just behind it was finance and administration. Number 3 was ministry, liturgy, and pastoral care. Number 4, communications and networking. Number 5, facilities and property. Number 6, legal, HR, and regulatory. So that's around the question of asked around from a diocesan financial perspective, the needs of our churches. From our shared diocesan ministry. Number 1, clear, very clear. It's statistically significant clarity. Reconciliation was viewed as number 1. Number 2 and number 3 were fairly tightly grouped. Creation care, particularly around carbon footprint. And then refugee program. Number 4, justice and peace. Number 5, legal. Beyond our borders, the largest gap, the largest lead was around national Indigenous ministries. About 3 times the other 2. So large one there, national first, Indigenous ministries, ecclesiastical province, and the National Church General Synod. Of course, the other thing is always what the comments lead you to, and the comments help you interpret, what the data looks like. So what I've done is, again, taken like the data where you do things like waiting to draw together where the trends are, where the center of information is trying to then take the comments and look for the common themes, look for the things that are heard more than once, look for the things that, are constructive. So just walking through them. The first was, appreciation for the opportunity to be heard. And then some of the discussion we did have around concern that, timing is tight and that we have an Episcopal change happening. Those comments were made a couple of times. Questions or a number of comments that centered around more outreach. And I'll mention something that I would consider to be a common piece through this and work that we're going to need to do to go forward. Areas like outreach, mission, ministry, there's a number of those words you can use, which more outreach. What does that mean? It's going to mean different things in different places, in different communities. So one of the challenges will be is, what do we specifically start to mean by that? Right? What is outreach? Is it diocesan level outreach that we're trying to common things? I mean, one can argue that PWRDF is a national outreach, crosses all our dioceses. But there's a lot of things. What do we mean by outreach? And that's work we would need to do to start to build what that would actually look like, rather than just a generic term. Mission. Similar thing. Finally, then, and that was linked to that is we need to look outwards, not inwards. A couple of people commented, we need to see past the walls of our church. Again, that varies by church. Shift from building and maintenance to mission, and we've talked about over the last 10 years. Being supportive, and being collaborative and cooperative. Yeah, that comes to culture, and that comes to how we work things through. But that is one that in general came across from a number of people's comments. How we have respectful conversations and actions. Interesting, and these two got grouped together in a number of people's comments. Shared ministries, and that's typically where we're sharing, typically across clergy, across the ministry of a number of churches. Shared ministries that have been programs and shared capabilities. And those shared capabilities being, how do we share the capability of each church, which is more than the priest, or the priest in charge, the incumbent, but across all those pieces. Creativity, imagination, and outside the box thinking. And again, that's stuff you have to delayer to really try and understand it. But areas that come up many times. Looking beyond, right? Looking at not only at the how and when, or look at the how we do things, when we do things, not just what we do. Yeah, these are some of those comments making, when you read them, you have to stop and think. But saying, oh, we get very focused around what we do, how are we doing it, and when we do it. Number of people that took the perspective to stop and think about, we should be thankful for what we have. Now we have, obviously we have challenges. We know that. Different challenges in every place. But we should also around be thankful for what we have. Number of comments that built around our urgency. That we need to move forward. We need to make hard decisions. And we need to move forward. And there's an urgency. Number of comments around the reality that in the next number of years, we're going to see a good number of clergy retire. That's not just a Diocese of Ontario phenomenon, that's across the national church, certainly across all the dioceses in this province. So retiring clergy, and that's matters of numbers, but also experience. Focus on climate change and how that, and it's again, how that reflects at the church level. And certainly that's one of the changes, that one of the things the Green Group has shifted their focus to trying to get, how do we support churches focusing on? And so that was an area that came out in a number of places. I mentioned communications, and this is one that's interesting, and a couple of people that I've had conversations with, this comes up, there's lots of communication comes out. We do a weekly e-news that comes out to everybody. There's the dialogue, there's bishops' messages, there's Facebook, there's all kinds of things. Always can be more, somebody's looking for it. But one of the things that was an interesting observation is trying to get at communications within a church. And I think that, again, varies by the culture of the church. But a number of that led to that, talking about, one of the examples in the conversations was, well, if you're on parish council, you know what's going on. If you're not, don't. Some churches, there's readouts from parish council meetings, there's awareness of where things are. Some churches, what's coming back is that there isn't any. There's just, everybody assumes everybody else just knows. So how communication happens within a church? Lots lots of stuff around recruiting. I labeled it recruiting new members. But that whole challenge of what is, where do people come from? How do, and why would they come? There's a whole stream of things there. But the point is new membership. Several reminders that we are in this because we are supposed to be evangelists. We are supposed to carry the gospel forward. And the last one, actually, this sentiment occurred a number of times, and I chose one wording that somebody used. Focus on the traditional for the elderly. And be happy for as long as it lasts. Right? It'll wind itself down, but we'll enjoy the ride. And again, that's the it's kind of it's another perspective on it. Right? And again, we are, as the bishop is constantly talking about, we are a relational diocese and we're a diverse diocese. So we have diversity in opinion and perspective, theology and liturgical practice and everything we do. We are, but that's so that is another perspective there. And there are churches, I've been in meetings where it's basically, I just want to make sure there's somebody here to turn the lights out after my funeral. By the way, the reason that I'm on the cemetery board is to make sure that plot is still there when I go to get buried. So it's not as, I use that comment because it is provoking, thought provoking, but it's an interesting perspective. So based on comments, questions, and some of the pieces through, one of the other things I wanted to put some piece into was we talk about the diocesan budget. Budget for 1.6 million, shrinking as income has slipped back a bit, but there's a definitive piece of things that happen there. But there's a lot of other things that aren't just funded by the operating budget. And there's other things, for example, that would need to be funded differently. So I wanted to put some of the questions we got were around, the diocese has lots of money. So I put a little bit together to just try and frame some of that. So we do have what we refer to as unrestricted capital funds. Those are funds that we can use those funds as we see fit. Right, within our governance model, how they would happen. There's also a set of restricted funds. Just like most of our churches have restricted funds, there's either external restrictions. So for example, someone left in their will, left money. Good example is, we've had people that left money to Camp Hyanton. We have since disposed of Camp Hyanton. We no longer have a camping ministry. Some left a provision in their will that if Hyanto's not there, it can be used for. Others just didn't do anything. That money now sits. And how do you deal with it? The classic one was there was a rain handle before I came in where there was someone back, I believe in the 20s, that left money, $2,000 to support theology students headed for ordination to the priesthood in Preston. Since that time, that money was never utilized. So the income continued to grow. You know what? If you take compound growth over, say, 100 years, pretty impressive. That money is restricted by that will. You have to go to court to get it changed. And Wayne led the effort that got it changed so that it didn't change the core purpose, which is theological student support, but it got expanded to Leeds Granville, not just. That's an example of a restricted fund. You had to go to court, and I would dare say there was tens of thousands of dollars spent to get it done. So there's restricted funds for trusts and wills. There's money that we hold for other groups. Right? We hold money for constituent groups, for refugees. So they have deposited the money with the diocese, and they are, that group typically non-parish groups. We have other pieces that is not under our control. Then there's other funds that are internally restricted. Take a browse through our canons. So there is a canons that describe things like our clergy trust fund. Clergy trust fund provides widowed, orphan, and orphans of clergy with a payment every year. And that's held in a restricted fund, but it's capital. And we use the income from that restricted capital fund to pay that. That's prescribed in the canons. So there's a chunk of capital that is restricted, internally restricted. There is the Kingston Rectory Fund, which, you know, payments made from that would cross over 7 churches. There's funds that are restricted for an operating reason. Best example of that is the insurance deductible fund. So we have about $35,000 that sits in that fund that gets held for paying the reduction in the deductibles. Bishop's discretionary fund, and then of course the biggest one's the new ministry. But those are all funds that we hold in capital that are restricted. Give you a feel, we have 4.5 million diocesan funds. That's how it breaks down. About 20% is unrestricted. About 15% is externally restricted. About 65% is internally restricted. So when we say, well, the diocese has all this money, that's what it is. There is some other pieces. So against that as well, we have at the end of the year, our parishes owe the diocese about $700,000. That's CMM, payroll, insurance, and interest that sits at the end of the year. We have about $60,000 where we have done viability work for parishes, done restructuring. There's been loans set there. We have capital loans to churches. So that program is about $50,000 of asset there. The investment fund is about $23 million at the end of the year. That's both the central investment fund and the cemetery. 18 million of that is parish money. And then finally, we carry a line of credit and we carry payables. You know, you always, at the end of the year, you owe 1.8 million that sits there. So when you take those pieces, and then that's the financial base as we talk about things that are outside the operating budget. So as we talk about a 3-year framework, and what for absolute clarity, I put together a scenario for discussion purposes. By the way, the charts will be up on the website, so you're welcome to take them down, but they'll be up on the website as it always are, on with the report. This just looks at over 3 years, and again, we have concerns expressed that we're going to lock in a new bishop. We're going to lock in a new bishop regardless, to some level, because we have financial reality we have to deal with. However, what I've put together here is basic set of pieces that would let us chew on where you go. So if you look at what we've heard, right, I just went down the line. What I know from our modeling is that our 2025 income, we expect is going to come down a little bit. It's church income. And it'll probably be reasonably flat from there. The bishop's office, we're assuming there'll be some costs for the new bishop, and that'll go up some. Business finance and admin, again, we're looking at increasing amounts of services like bookkeeping. Potential to increase that. Communications, governance. You can run down the line. Put a question mark beyond our borders. Number of comments related around what we do with our national church, general, with our proportional gift. So of our 1.6 million of expenses, right, as you can see, between the national and provincial, over 300 of that is where that goes. But the one thing that came clear from the commentary in the last meeting and from the comments was that there seems to be a general recognition that after a couple of years in COVID of running deficits, we need to get back to a balanced budget. And so I simply listed there at the bottom that you would look to balance the budget. And as you model your income at the top, that determines what your expenditures are. Then you make the decisions where to place them. Within a given year and then within a given period, you would cross that through. There are, one of the reasons I walked through those other pieces. For example, one of the things that came very clear is there's a strong interest in support for churches for carbon reduction. As you know, the Green Group has asked churches to, in response to the Synod motion in 2021, ask churches to come back with where's your carbon footprint look like? Where are you going to go with this? So we have churches that are coming forward saying, we'd like to put in cold heat pumps, or we'd like to, there's a number of areas we can do to reduce your footprint. Is there any diocesan money to support that? Well, we have our capital loan program. But the question comes back is, well, there's no assistance. At this point, there is not. So if we're going to choose to do that, that's not like our tech grants, which we did based on Sue's money, and we're, $500,000. We spent huge amounts of money. You start talking about giving significant enough to make changes in some of these, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. That's something we decide we want to do. And then that would come outside the operating. Or you could decide, for example, to place a surtax on CMM and use that to fund it. There's a whole other group of challenges. But that we can talk about options. How do we go about doing that? So this was just a packet, the piece that said we would come, and this is, as we work this process in, will be evolutionary. We're not going to drop this into place in the first year. Right? Where we would come with a Synod looking for basic guidance around some of the key elements that would build into this. That would then feed through, and for example, in this work would then feed into the budget process for 2024. But it would also then be in the context of trying to look forward to 2025 and 2026. So that we get that, we talked about the flexibility that comes with the longer piece. It allows, as we go through change, it allows as a new bishop steps into place, look at framework and to look at what's there, it can change. But it provides that framework and discussion. But the biggest piece is having the discussion and getting people engaged with the work of pieces. Through that, of course, we would continue each year to do an annual budget that we all are familiar with the format. By the way, we restructured our budget into the same structure we used as questionnaire around, support. We've been doing that for a number of years. That's the way we've done our budget. That's the way that we do our reporting. Logically, that's how we build it in the model. The annual budget is then aligned around those pieces from the framework through a consultation process again, which will lead to approval by council in October and November. The other piece of that would be around the reporting of it. Again, council gets it quarterly, so when we go to the April meeting later this month, council will get Q1 actuals and the forecast updated for the rest of the year. What we do each quarter, say there's January, February, March, and then we take what the budget looks like for the next 9 months, make adjustments that we know already are going to happen. Sometimes it's timing changes, sometimes it's other things that have changed, and we update and it becomes the new forecast. Budget is still the budget, is still the budget. But the forecast gets updated as quarterly. And so, one of the things with the warden treasurer calls, we now have a regular monthly communication. We'll certainly summarize that back to most calls. And then the intention is to do a mid-year feedback out in total around where things are halfway through the year. The audited financial statements. For those reports that are like the one that's here, those are what we call management statements, right? Because they're for us to manage, and they're done from our own system. What we do is once a year, we bring our audit firm in. Philip and I were talking a few minutes ago, that costs us money. That's, $25,000 a year to have an audit. It's a choice we continue to make. But the audit is done, and then there are audited financial statements done in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. Each year that changes. Just had a conversation with our auditors about our IT security stuff, because that's now part of their auditing template. There's a whole range of things that the auditors, and what the auditor does at the end is basically they state their professional opinion that the statements actually reflect the activities and financial situation of the organization. That's what you really pay for in here. The auditor to say, we're independent, we're expert, we've reviewed it, it's accurate. So the council just, the audit committee, and we had an excellent audit committee chaired by Ken and Peter Case. And that committee met with the auditors, went through the report, brought it to council. The auditor was presented at the March council meeting. Council then approved it. Those statements, I'm just waiting for them to come back without the draft watermark in them. And then get them in a soft copy so they can work on the website. And there, of course, it's part of the syntax. And then what we want to do as well is try and link that to where we are on goals and objectives. And of course, the difficulty is most times a lot of those numbers are somewhat objective. Most things against performance have a level of subjectivity. This isn't about how many burgers you can make in an hour or how many cars you sell in a month. This is most of our goals and objectives are more soft. That'll be work that we want to be able to do. Linking those two works. So the schedule with this, we had our meeting 2 weeks ago. It was in Napanee and online. We are here in Gananoque, and let me pause, and I know Don's not, he's left us, but I think he's probably listening in or will watch the recording, but certainly very much thank you to Don Matthews, to Archdeacon Wayne Barley, priest in charge here at Christ Church. But thank you for the hospitality and the use of the facilities. And then pre-Senate meetings, these are not specifically regional meetings per se, but they are May 2nd in Roslyn, May the 3rd, and that is in person only. May the 3rd in Berryfield, that'll be in person and online. And then May the 4th, be with you, in Oak Leaf. So if there's starfighters or Death Stars or something sitting in the parking lot at Oak Leaf, we can work from there. Put the bishop to come in as Darth Vader. So, and I am going to, there was questions around what's the agenda of Senate, and so one of the things Ken and Michael Reed and Dr. Delisney is on the bridge, both they are the co-chairs for Senate. So we'll just wrap this and then we'll ask Michael to give us a sense of what Senate's looking at. The next steps, go back to council. Of course, nothing goes to Senate without we haven't gone through council first. Senate council, as we talked in the last meeting, Senate council is Senate between Senates. Senate sits every 2 years. Senate council legally, governance-wise, is Senate between Senates. So that meeting is the 25th. We talked about the pre-Senate meetings, and of course, Michael will speak to this. So maybe an opportune time. Do you want to talk about Senate a little bit now before we break into?
Is there an opportunity for questions?
Now?
Is that now or?
No.
Okay. Thank you was my cue.
I will make my part very brief so we get to the discussion, so. And, don't want to steal too much of my thunder from my pre-Senate meetings either, so I'm not gonna give all the details because we don't have quite all the details in place yet. But to give you an overview of what, Senate's going to look like at the end of May. Friday is our governance piece within the structure of the diocese and of Senate, which will focus largely on continuing the conversations we've been having around finance. There are some motions that we know are coming to the floor of Senate for consideration that are coming out of various groups and parishes and individuals to be dealt with. So that'll be part of that as well. We have two separate pieces of election to deal with. One is for provincial Senate and the other is for new Senate council members. And I believe that information was part of David Seltzer's mailing that went out last week. So there's details around that. We have a presentation that day too from the folks at Gananoque, their language and culture presentation that we're going to do on the Friday as well. And looking forward to having our friends from Gananoque more engaged with us and sharing something more of their life with us as well. So we're looking forward to that. We have, of course, the regular bits and pieces of Synod, which includes also the bishop's charge to Synod, which takes place on Friday morning with some discussion around that and then feedback later in the day. And as the day closes, we have, of course, the report of the scrutineers, responses to the bishop's charge, reflections by our Synod observer, who is Bishop Michael Price of the Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Canada. And it's just about his swan song too, isn't it, Bishop? Because he's retiring in June, I believe, as well. So he is, and he's been doing the job. Yes, and one of the earth crust go over almost, I think. So we'll have you with us. The other exciting person that I'm looking forward to inviting, that we just found this out yesterday, And we're being joined by Sister Constance Joanna from the Sisters of St. John the Divine. And she is coming to be our Synod chaplain for this session of Synod. So really looking forward to welcoming her as part of our Synod as well. And the day closes with Bishop Bell casting the vision for the following day's work that we're going to do together. Saturday is basically Bishop Bell leading us through a visioning process and they call it mapping, ministry action plan work. And providing us with tools that we might be able to take a hold of and use back in our own parishes as we continue to do planning and looking forward on the more grassroots level there. And so that's basically all day on Saturday. So governance on Friday, more missional focus on Saturday led by Bishop Bell. The closing of the day on Saturday is Archbishop Germain, who will close out the day with some reflections with us leading into the service on Sunday at the cathedral, where we'll gather at 11 o'clock and celebrate Pentecost together, our 160th anniversary plus. And our own bishops offer opportunity to thank our bishop for his faithful ministry over 12 years with us. So that'll unfold at the church on Sunday. Archbishop Germain will be our preacher. Bishop Bell will continue to be with us for that, and it should be a grand celebration, being all planned by the members of the cathedral and our own diocesan worship committee. So that's very broad. I'm hoping that by the pre-synod meetings, I'll be able to detail more of that, but that generally is the overview of synod, and there'll be more details to come, and of course, certainly more details before we gather at the end of May. And we just have to get through a little election thing in a couple of weeks' time, and kids will be able to focus more on other things as well. So, but that's a very quick overview to have an idea of what to look forward to. And I do say that not tongue in cheek at all. I'm certainly looking forward to Synod. I think it's going to be a learning time, but also challenging time. But I always find I come away from Synod with more than I arrived at. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity of sharing in that with all of us across the diocese. Thanks, Alex.
I don't know, don't put you on the spot, but anything on the electoral synod, just timing wise to cover?
We're endeavoring to ensure there'll be no Chinese influence. Yes, I'm not quite sure what I can say. I can say we have two candidates. I understand that those names and other documentation will be available to people beginning sometime tomorrow. I know we have received just over 60 questions for the town hall meeting next Wednesday night. I spent a good part of last night and today sort of grouping those into categories. With obviously 60 questions in 2 hours. You're not going to get an in-depth chance to get answers. So it's where your Janice.
Yes.
We'll be working on that actually tomorrow. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So it's looking good. So you will see me. Don't miss a meeting because someone will make you the moderator of town hall. One stinking meeting. I will be moderating next week. So
I can go a better person.
where our sins are justly displeased. There you go.
And I know from speaking with the bishop, his hope is that the bishop-elect would be able to attend all or part of synod. So, but that of course depends on the bishop. Okay. So, with that, there's questions, obviously, Bishop, Michael here from Synod and Electoral Synod, so we're open to questions. Oh,
Thank you for that very thorough coverage. And you raised a lot of ideas. So with any one or several of those ideas sorry, Philip Berry, St. Paul's Cardinal. What do we do with them? I'm thinking, you're not surprised, your mention of, using some of the diocesan resources to support the creation care. Good idea. So what do we do with that thought? Where is the ball? How do we pick it up?
I think that's, I mean, that's an example of where we have an active, engaged group that's across the diocese that is focused on creation care, green group. They have been for many years. And so there's a case where there is a group that can sit down and work through what are the goals and objectives we want to achieve with it. Right? How do you build criteria? How do you set priorities? How do you sit and say, with a limited amount of money, we prioritize heat pumps over new windows or whatever else you might choose to do. So you need a group that's going to sit and take that one liner and say, how do we now bring that to pass? And then that would come back to the council. And we would of course work with them through to see how is that going to get managed? Because one of the things, and again, you find this when you do things like the tech grants, Mark and I can tell you, right? All of a sudden you start getting churches sending you, hey, we have our money like this afternoon. And well, we don't actually want that money. We wanted a new coffee pot. And there's a long explanation on why the coffee pot is actually a tech. So you get all of that. You have to put stuff in place to be able to sort that out. And so I think the work will be is finding a group of champions. In this case, the green group that would then take that work, set out what we want to do, set out how we would go about doing it, and then the last piece is how you pay for it. Right? So that would come to Synod Council. There may be money set aside, but again, the other thing that we do is everything has to have government's approval to do. So when the budget is passed, there's now government's approval to spend that money. When we do things like the new ministry grants, the reach and stretch grants, so the council approves an allocation out of the ministry fund for that. So that, we would have a series of things that would come back to council in order to put that in place and on the ground.
So, thank you. So to follow that example, does that mean that, I need to line that in as the only as well? In fact, there is one for creation here, right now, $2,000.
Right.
I suspect that we go a little more than that. Where does that figure get changed, or is it in the budgetary process for this year? Is there?
So again, and just for background, right? The green group has always had a couple of $1,000. And that money has generally gone towards an event. They've brought a speaker in, they did a water, Wayne helped me here, a couple of years before COVID, they did a water, thing, they've done a series of them, they would have an event or two. Sorry?
Catherine Cahill, the cathedral, the property.
So most of and I would argue that this has evolved, but that's where the focus has been, it's around education, around beating the drum, getting people to pay, and we've now gone into a different phase. And so now what would happen is you would sit within the process we want to get to, you would sit in that 3-year thing and say, we want to get to a certain point. We want to have, I'll make something up. We want half of our churches to reduce their carbon footprint through heating changes. We want that within this 3-year period.
And we're going to fund them.
And then the question is based on the program, here's how you would fund it. Here's the choices you would make.
Alec, can I jump into that? Because that's precisely the kind of thing you're talking about, Phil, that fits, as I understand the concept of the financial framework. Because our normal way of doing things is annual budgeting, is Alex put up there with the fences, you budget for 1 year, you deal with that, then you move to next year, you deal with that, and on. The framework goes over top of that, so if you're talking, and more churches are asking about this. Green Group's getting requests around, they purchase a thermal camera, they're helping parishes do audits for their footprint and things like that. You can begin to bring in and say, okay, how do we change that line item? Or do we do it in the operating budget? Is there another way to do it? How can we do that? But you've got the time to begin to think about that. But what you have said is, it's a priority. So take 3 years out, we're saying this is a priority, because you say in our normal way of doing, you start in October and say, we're gonna change $2,000 to $50,000. So now you've got to make some drastic changes in a matter of weeks, as opposed to saying, we've now set a goal and target that is within this 3-year framework, that as we continue our budgeting over 3 years, we're gonna start moving that towards that particular goal. And as you saw too, there's the consultative process that overarches all of that. So that's the feedback that is coming in from the parishes saying, for example, is there support? We've said it in a Synod resolution as a priority. Is there support, or is it up to us to come up with the funds ourselves? And if we start saying, look, our parishes are saying that this is a priority, you can begin to work that in through that framework and then vector down to begin to raise that up. But it allows the planning process a much tighter time frame than 2 months. And that can play into a series. I think that's an excellent example, because I think that question has come up a number of times and will continue to come up as parishes prioritize that, because prioritizing the green initiatives are not only reducing the carbon footprint, it's a huge cost saving in the long run to the parishes. We were doing this a while ago with the solar panels. This parish has solar panels on its roof, if I'm not mistaken, Wayne. And so there was a solar panel project. A lot of parishes bought into that and had that. I mean, it also provides income to the parish as well. So there's a series of things that are there, but I think having intentionality around the budgeting process in a longer window makes a lot of sense.
So in fact, this is a good example of why we want to go to the three-year rolling framework.
That's precisely what you're.
Again, back to change, because the other thing we tend to do is we often will make a change and then fall back. We can't achieve it in a year, we either don't do it, or you get partway, next year something else is more important. So now trying to look at things in a longer window, I think gives us a better chance of succeeding on those types of initiatives. And that's the challenge. So we have a lot of things that are going to take longer tail change. Chris?
Thank you. For those online, Reverend Trish Miller leads Anglican Ministries. Just so I have it clear in my head, so the framework is I'm just gonna put it in simple lay terms, is basically a categorized, not a line itemized, categorized budget that just rolls over, extend over 3 years with variances expected year to year. Is there limits on what those variants are that will trigger something beyond city council? It's like, okay, we cannot give the bishop, I'm picking on the bishop, I'm sorry, the next bishop, can we give the bishop's office an increase of 20%?
How's that picking on me?
But so
No.
will there be those sort of triggers? And can we, in the final product that goes before city council and then goes through the 3 sort of deanery meetings, can we sort of explicitly say what some of the assumptions are? Like, one big assumption is CMM percentage, that 20% is not going to increase.
So
Is that fair to say? Like,
you would,
I'm just wondering, my
you can
concern.
choose. So that, but the answer, Chris, is we can choose to do this as we wish. What we conceived is that, yeah, there would be, it says that puts a cap. It's a framework, right? If you build a 10 by 10 shed, you pour a 10 by 10 pad. You've now built and put up 10 by 10 frame. How big's your shed? You might lean a little bit to get another, so this, you would then say, council can't exceed, pick a number, 5%, or can't, right?
Well, what's the mechanism for doing that?
The mechanism for,
How do we entrench that in the framework that gets voted on by Senate?
and so we would put, and it's an interesting question, the second question is what gets voted on by Senate? But what we are building, and again, this is going to evolve as we learn into it. But yeah, we would say, we believe that, I'll pick a number, quote, 5% is the band. And that's how much you would put in there that says to make that shift within. Or you may say, you can't not be balanced. If you're going, you can increase spending in the bishop's office, you gotta cut it down somewhere else. So, you know, you can put those kinds of, that's part of the governance model we have to build out around. Right, and so part of this is, again, living into it as we go, right? And then that's the parts that we'll have to, and we're gonna learn things and move from there. But the question now is, so, you know, year to year, what changes? There is no governance. Theory, we could come with a budget that says, yeah, $500,000 deficit.
Or you can say churches now you have to pay 25% CMS.
Correct. And by the way, if you read the canons of Constitution, right, that's all within the power of. But what it does is it says, Senate is a governance body. Right? That, at the end of the day, that's what Senate is. We are episcopally led, canonically governed. So Senate is a governance body. Senate puts that framework up in place, and then council takes the work and does the pieces through. And then it gets managed by, some cases staff, some cases by programmers. And we decide how we want that to structure. And you know what? We're gonna make a few decisions that we're gonna go, we need to change that. Because we're gonna learn into this. And so that, without question, is where those things sit. But what doesn't change is that the budget that's approved every year, the framework that lays over top of it all, right, has a longer tail to it. And then Senate can change the framework again. But I see a situation where you said, we've got a major change. We need to call Senate. Not in our DNA to do that, but we can.
But I think we need to be upfront and set those parameters to the best of our ability, and I realize we're doing something different here.
And
But I
that's
think
what
I can foresee some of the triggers.
that's part of what I tried to get to with that chart. Was saying it needs to be kind of that summary level that says it's a balanced budget. Right, and what we see out of that is this going here and not going there. But there's decisions you make within that. Once you lock the balanced budget, and then you lock the CMM, pretty well an expense management process, isn't it?
But that is really going to depend on how much it leads into being a mission-shaped diocese.
What that says is where you're going to spend that money. And that is still the, right, and that is part of it. That's part of what the new bishop will obviously start to lead through. And that's what the new, as we build that then says, yep, and then we make the shift that says we're gonna get out of this and get into that.
I could see where, the calling was Senate, we were able to manage our way through the pandemic. Mainly because we were at the benefit of the federal government programs. But let's say the federal government said, no programs. And we're facing what we were facing in terms of finances. I think we would have to find a way to come together to make some really drastic decisions. And, but we didn't have to. We managed it through consultative process, through the wardens and treasurers creation, and then through city council to be able to come up with how we did that support program. But I could see Synod being involved or something dramatic like that. I think other things, we could manage our way through the consultative process through Synod council. What I would love to see is the opportunity too, with that kind of setup, is the engagement of the Synod councillors. And that's always been my bugbear, is that without regional assemblies, there's no way for the Synod councillors to provide feedback and then carry stuff forward. They're kind of floating at it. And so it's up to the individual parishes to say, who's our Synod councillors? Let's invite them to a meeting. What's going on in Synod council? I think with this kind of framework, it's going to become more and more important that the Synod councillors take ownership to say, I've got to make sure this gets communicated and I've got to feed back in to the governing body, the Synod council, in between the Synod, leading up to a Synod that will happen while the framework is unfolding over 3 years, will be a Synod in the middle of it. So now you've got that sort of thing. That's kind of a hope. And I want to build that into, right now we're in a transition time. So one of the things, talking about that Synod in May, I'll be doing my charge to the Synod. That charge is not going to be just me. It's going to be me and the bishop-elect. And I want to sit down with whoever that individual is and say, okay, what do we want to be building? And I need to do my retrospective. And then, but what do you want me to say to the Synod of the diocese that you will hopefully be attending? And in that sort of begin to set the stage. And that person's not going to have a fully formed idea of it, but the general ideas of what we want to do. And I know one of the things that I'll be discussing with my successor, because it has been a challenge, is Synod council, because it never was able to function the way it was intended. It was supposed to, the regional assemblies would elect the councillors would report back to the assemblies and bring the information over. We've never had that, which meant that the Synod councillors, I believe, always had a struggle with understanding their mandate. And that's my view. Anyway, that was not the end of it.
So, John Schreiner from St. Thomas. I'm a bit slow. I've only done budgets in hospitals for 20 years. We know how those go. But I think in the last 10 minutes, I'm getting a bit better at that. I mean, I was going to ask you, why are we doing this now? Because when I walked in the room, I thought we were budgeting for 3 years. But now I'm getting the sense we're still budgeting year by year. But all we're doing is setting priorities that hopefully we can stick to. I mean, every budget, every year, hope we can stick. So we're not really budgeting for 20 years or for 3 years. We're setting some priorities that we're going to think about, going to drive our budgets for the next 3 years. But every year the budget will still be reviewed and then be redone.
That's correct.
So I don't have to worry about the fact, why are we doing it now? Because the only thing we're doing is a little bit more visioning for a little bit longer.
And this is an over, so I think one of the things that, again, communicated, and that's, so that this is an overlay. So the budget process continues. Every year there is a budget. Every year there's consultation to build the budget. Every year the budget will come to Synod council for approval.
But I must say, until the bishop explained it, he's explained scriptures all the time, so he's good at this. Until he explained it, I didn't get that.
With that, I apologize, but we have, that's why we have so many.
I think it was part of our conversation too, Alec, coming out of the last meeting. Because the way, like, I'm not a financial person, right? And so it's, I need to have it in kind of, and the way I see it is very much in the first year, you're vectoring, you start at 10,000 foot view. This is where you want to be in 3 years. But for some decisions we're going to need to make in the future, we can't make like that. We got to be able to make like this. But we keep checking as we're moving along. And the priorities change, circumstance on the ground can change. And that's the way I've understood it. I get it out the way you laid that all out, that overlay is to help us with that vector. And we have a clear sense. So we have that feel that we're moving. That's the way I see it. So
In the corporate world that I came, right, we had 3 planning exercises. Started so we had our strategic plan, cranked that up in January. Usually by February, March, you would have a 10-year strategic plan. Year 1, year 2, year 3, and then fuzzy from there. And then by the time you get into year 7, 8, 9, 10, it was really hopeful and sure. I'll weigh 55 pounds by then. All of that. Then we did, once that was approved, that would go all the way to the board and be approved. That context was then set for the operating plan. The operating plan is a 3 to 5 year plan. And that was done at another level, but it was done more at the, taking that strategic plan, looking now at the window there and setting that up. And then the board would approve that. And that would usually happen in the summertime, September. Then we begin the budget process for next year. And that would, and so each of those go, and then once you got the budget approved, you started all over again. So that's, the context here is that this operating plan level lets us build that continuity, does not replace the budget. It overlays the budget process, it sets parameters. So again, if we say council would be faced with the budget, Senate is set in the operating plan, 3-year plan, balanced budget. And we've set in there there's an objective 2. That's, we're gonna put money into creation, into greening church. And that would be a piece that you would then reflect back in your budget. That's the time. But the budget process, the budget doesn't stop. The process is, in fact, the timing doesn't stop. Unlike hospitals in government that can do budgets for 3 years down the road, we would struggle right now to put a budget together for next year. Too many open things to be able to do it this way. That's a simple reality.
And so when you go back to the parish council, because some of these budgets are coming. The fact that we're doing this now before a new bishop is here, it doesn't matter that much. The bishop will be, the new bishop would be involved in all of things.
We're simply putting the framework in place as far as where that takes us. You know, whether the new bishop decides we're not going to be focused on creation care, we're going to be focused on refugees. We're going to be focused on, you know, whatever. That can then happen, right? And that's the whole intention is not to restrict anything. But it's starting to put, but the other reality is if we don't start this now, next Synod isn't for 2 years. So, you know, we'll be 2 years later. Now, if you believe anything that we're talking about, that there's an urgency to starting to drive change. I think there's a number of churches that will struggle in 2 years' time to still be around. There's other churches that are being, you know, in a different mode, gone to a different space. There'll be a whole lot of things change. So that was part of the reason for getting it going now, was to start to introduce it.
I looked at it too, John, I looked at it too, from the lens of if I was starting over again. So if I was coming in, I mean, 12 years ago, when I came in, we had some pretty significant issues to deal with. And we had to deal with them, and it was painful. Part of what I hope for the transition, so once I know who I'm talking to, then we'll be heavy duty in the transition. And if I were in that person's shoes, the fact that I would be coming to a synod where there would be discussion about having some significant prioritization and planning, and this is where the feedback from this diocese that this individual now needs to get to know in that way is coming. So if it's creation care or if it's refugee, that all of them are important things. That to begin to see where that is at, as that individual then after the summer starts into the annual budget cycle that goes through October and in November, then Synod Council approving the budget for 2024. So you've got some sense of that trajectory and that budgeting piece. If I were coming in fresh, I would have loved to have had something like that, so that we didn't have to make the decisions that we had to take in 2011. That were, and all of you, I think all of you are on the table, know what some of those decisions were, and they were painful. But that's why having a budget, an annual budget system that says, okay, you gotta do this. And it's just, it doesn't allow for, I mean, some of the things we've been talking, the feedback around the proportional gift to the national church. I mean, that is a major piece of financing from this diocese. And I know every diocese is struggling around that, and for many, many, many years, our little Diocese of Ontario punched way above its weight level. We kept to the actual tithe when dioceses, all other dioceses in the province of Ontario, some of them are a lot wealthier than we are, were cutting back their proportional gift to the national church. We kept it. But we just have reached a point where that's a conversation we have. But instead of coming to October, November, and then picking up the phone and calling down to Toronto and saying, oh, by the way, we just cut our national proportional gift in half. Deal with it. We can say to them, we're having this conversation, and you need to know that that is coming into our, because of the prioritization that came out of it. That was great feedback that we did get at that meeting a couple of weeks ago. We got a lot of feedback around that. That issue came up. So they need to know that we're discussing this so that they can start to plan. And as Anglicans, we have a responsibility locally in our parishes, diocesan-wise, provincially, nationally, and internationally. That's who we are as a church. And that's our polity and practice. So I think it behooves us to have those kind of conversations. That's the other thing I like about this. It gives us time to have a reasonable conversation.
The one thing I like about is that if we're serious about being missional, you can't be missional if you don't have some kind of strategic plan to get to where we need to be.
Yeah.
And so it allows us to be much more missional in terms of how we're spending our dollars and towards building the kingdom. And I think that's for me, that was the selling point, is that you really can't be a missional church if you're always going to be like this. You can't do it. Have some vision.
This framework is a portion, an expression of our strategic plan.
That is,
It is a plan.
we are still using the strategic plan that Senate approved in 2016. Right? You still see us talking about connected, engaged, and, serving communities and those pieces. But yeah, one of the assumptions is going to be that a new bishop is going to draw together and eventually at some point look for a new vision. But to update the vision, do whatever you want to describe that. This then sets, part of this is saying it's going to take us time to change. It's going to take us time to build these things out. Let's get started. One of the questions that come up in the chat, just so they don't ignore the folks on, so what are we voting on in Synod? Priorities for the framework. That is correct. That's what would be voted on at Synod. Is saying, yep, this is, the priorities are as follows.
Meaning that we look at the framework as you illustrated it and say, I think line number 23 should be reduced by 25%, and line number 15 should be increased. Is that?
So the idea, and again, we can, gotta go through council, but the point being, you're gonna sit and say, and I think eventually we'll get to the point that says it's a range, a factor range, that says we're gonna put about 10% of our budget into that, of our expenditure into that. And so that eventually, there's ways we can build this, and again, I keep, this is not like there's a lot proven way that, this is not Boston Consulting where I can, spend $50,000 and buy the process. We're gonna put these basic precepts and governance around it in place. Then we're going to learn into it. We will adjust as we go. And so, yeah, that's what we would sit and say, there's an emphasis on, it could be as simple at this point as saying, the budget must be balanced, just making stuff up. But, the budget must be balanced. There's to be no increase in CMM. That, you know, we are going to increase spending on X. We're going to spend more money in the bishop's office. Right? That's what we absolutely need to do. And so those are the areas where we would say, look, without saying that's going to be $50.75. We would build that through, and that would come in the budget. And of course, one of the things that Synod does is it also reviews what Synod Council has done. Right? One of the things that's in your Synod package every year, or every Synod, is the acts of council. Synod can come back and say, we don't agree with that. Or we don't approve, you know, what you can do about it's a different discussion, but from a governance model, that is the way it works. So I think that's the part that as we work our way through, Synod will provide that clarity and guidance on priorities. And we'll flesh this out. And obviously, as we map it through, process will tune it.
The one thing I would add too is that remember, like, this part of it tonight is just, as Alec has been saying, it's just through the financial lens. And so, and I think it's a good point around, and I hadn't thought about this one until you mentioned it. We did 2016 plan, which was more than just the financial piece of it. And it could be too. That's where my successor is going to probably be beginning to think about that kind of visioning. That's so, which is much more, it includes the financial, but it is also much more than that. And my feeling about this idea is that becomes an ally for long range or strategic planning that are put in place that's much broader in terms of our mission, our ministry, what we prioritize. Let's say we begin to talk about conversations about, well, okay, Tricia's situation in the regional ministry. We want to talk about opportunities for that, where we don't wait until there's a situation that raises the conversation where people are proactive about saying, is our current numbers of churches that we have in congregations, do we need to have an intentional conversation around that and around building regional ministries? How do we deal with deployment of clergy? Those are things that are coming up in that national or provincial conference that I attended in June. We all caught COVID, but we attended in June around calling, identifying, training, forming, deploying clergy for tomorrow's church. What are we asking of people who are coming to be clergy within our church? What kind of church are they being deployed out into? And so that's way beyond just the financial framework and the fiscal lens. This is part of it, but when you mentioned that, Alec, it triggered that that's going to be something that I think will be engaged in. New leadership will be engaged in quite dramatically in the next couple of years, for sure.
Are you biased to that you are going to put together basically generic type statements for the meeting in a couple of weeks? We don't take anything until it's been through council. So the plan will be to take council to say, look, this is what we're proposing to, based on all the discussions we've had and the thing, and let's be honest, these discussions like tonight, they help tighten up, crispen up and adapt. So those, I think, the next meeting. So the pre-Senate meetings will be around, again, to bring that to what's going to come to Senate. So that's the goal, is to put, so let me be as simple as saying there'll be a few pieces, like it needs to be, I'll go back to basic precepts. It needs to be a balanced budget. Go back to that example I put up, it's just a scenario. It needs to be a balanced budget. It needs to, push more money, put more resources into this. It needs to, here's the following things. And that's the guidance that the Senate would then provide to council for approving the budget.
So the council is going to meet before the recent meetings again and
The Senate
provide the
council,
framework for those meetings.
Senate council meets on the 25th. Senate council meets the 25th. That's how why we packed this in a bit is because we're trying to get these meetings so we can get something back to council. It says, here's what we heard. So we've got, I don't know, 50, between the people in the room and online, 50 odd people tonight. And we've got, with the data that we gathered in the previous piece, that helps formulate all that. There'll be another round of stuff. There'll be, council will then have questions and changes or whatever. Then it'll come back to, then if need be, after the pre-synod meetings, council's gonna meet again days before synod, right? Week before synod. So again, there's a number of opportunities. And I understand people are uncomfortable because we usually take 2 or 3 years to just to figure out that we need to change. Let alone what we're gonna do. This is trying to start, but the other reality is, I believe this does tie because it's going to be fall, it's gonna be September before a new bishop gets their feet under the desk. By the time they get to wherever they're coming from, and then they take vacation, and they, usually that's 3 months or so, and then they take a month's vacation. It's gonna be September before they actually sit at the desk and start doing the role. Then they're gonna be hit with the fire hose. From the proverbial fire hose. Because there's, on top of all the things that this bishop deals with every day, the next bishop's gonna be caught with everybody trying to get up to speed. So it's gonna, so I think these pieces allow then as they come in, because otherwise we'll be sitting here a year from now having this discussion. I'm not sure that's the best path.
If we sit here a year from now, having the
Same discussion.
product of this.
Exactly. We're evaluating what we've done and what else we need to do. And I think we've done well. If we're just sitting here still talking about, we need to change. That's like, I'm gonna move from the second last pew to the, I know I keep hearing that you shouldn't sit at the back. All right, I'm gonna move from the second last pew to the third last pew. You happy? Sorry, Michael? Oh, I thought you were. It is something we're going to wind our way through. I think we're going to learn as we go. We'll be led by a new bishop, and that'll judge. The beauty of this is that the content can change. But the basic, and I'll go back to your discussion around, hospitals and budgets and that kind of stuff. The basic precepts of these things are more or less the same. Right? And so what we're doing is not like we're doing something that's radical and crazy. Right? And we're doing things that have got their roots in in the rest of the world. How we now start to prepare to manage change.
Plumbing is good.
Difference between a wish and a.
You got a hand up there.
Yep, okay. Go ahead, it's Mark.
Hi. It's Angie Kelman. I'm from St. Luke's out in Lyndhurst. My question is about the champions that you've been talking about. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the champions will be coordinating between bringing the framework between the parishes and Synod Council and moving it forward. And I'm just wondering how if you have any idea of how many champions will be needed. Is it sort of based on per project? Are you expecting them to come from clergy as well as the members of the parishes? And it sounds like a fairly involved job. And so I'm just wondering if it's realistic to think that we're going to find enough people to be effective driving this.
And that's certainly, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're seeing is that more churches are running out of human capital than financial. Every church has some level of financial challenge in the post-COVID. What we're seeing is more time, like just this around how many, if you listen to our registrar talk about how many calls she's getting that says, we're struggling to get 2 people to stand as delegates for Senate. we can't, I mean, Bill, for the Senate is still open for nominations, but are you overrun with people wanting to stand for, provincial council or Senate council?
To be honest, at this point, no, but that's not really where our focus has been. I'm hoping that we'll be very busy after April 26th on that. I do know for Frontenac, I think we have 3 candidates for Senate council at this point.
So those are the pieces, but capital, human capital, getting people who will step up. It's a trouble at the church level. The last couple of churches that have closed, it was not about money. One was, but the others, it was about, there's nobody left to clean. There's nobody left to do bulletins. There's nobody left to make sure the show is shoveled, to come in and turn the heat on, to read lessons, and there's only 6 or 8 of us left, and there's nobody. So human capital is very much that. What is going to depend is as you pick these areas, and I think with the one around creation care is an easy one, because the green group is in place. They have functioned for many years. And they have clear opinions and clear work that they do. And they have, so if we set out and turned to them and said, please, develop a proposal around the needs for churches to support programs to reduce footprint. With the data that they've asked churches to turn in by the 1st of April, then that group would take that on and be those champions. They would put that program together and drive that. I think that's pretty clear. As you get, and we've always had, let's be honest, we always had a strong group around Camp Hyanto. One of the things that was the demise of Hyanto in the end was we just plain we couldn't afford paid staff. And you couldn't get enough volunteer staff. So that caused an issue. So I think there's those pieces that have come, but as we set those, and that's why I think, Angie, that we will end up having to be judicious in picking those heavyweight areas. Because there's only so much you can afford the money for, and there's only so much you can afford the people to be able to do. Now, we do have things going. We don't talk about it much. We may even get the bishop to reflect on this, but we had a pot of money that we've had set up that we used originally when we hired Taylor. She spoke at Synod and then left. But we right now, as you've seen, we have Russ Grant in place as our as on the coordinator side. Bishop, you want to?
Speak a little bit to that, because that also ties in with some of the things of community engagement coordinator. And Russ right now, Angela and others in the room and on the call is traveling around to the deaneries, to the parishes. And I've had some conversations with people that Russ has gone to speak to around what's happening around the diocese, around community engagement, because that's also going to tie in with the whole focus around becoming a mission-shaped diocese and our engagement. There's a lot of things that are happening, and to be able to work with that. So Russ is also working with Bishop Susan right now around what's going to be happening with her presentations and be very much involved with that. So you could see where through that position, the whole issue of community engagement and supporting parishes, we're doing that now with reach and stretch grants in terms of the ministries that are happening. But if a parish is engaging heavily in community engagement, things are doing, how can we support that is a priority. I could see a champion in terms of what Russ would bring back from that position while he's there, but where that would hand off to. Other things that we see each year, I think we still do this, each organization submits a request for funding. As the budget cycle begins, a letter goes out to training and development, for example, and the other committees of the diocese. What are your budgetary requirements so we can begin to feed that in? It could be that with what's coming up with this whole new ministries conference and how that's engaging the training and development committees and their corollaries in the other dioceses, that could become a priority. Maybe they would be looking at funding to support that. That would be part of a larger provincial strategy or something locally in the diocese. And that's where I see the champions coming. stewardship issues. We have a staff person who's also in stewardship. We have a stewardship and congregational development committee. Also, again, those are these organizations that can become champions. Bottom line is we don't have a great number of these things. It's not like there's a lot of different organizations that are out there doing things within the diocese. A lot of it is happening at the local level. And one of the things I'm hoping with Russ's position is that there will be a lot of awareness raising about what some of these parishes are doing in their communities, which is just, it's quite impressive, is to be able to connect that together to see what's happening. But that's happening at the local level. So how do we continue to seed that and fund that, support that from a diocesan level? And that's the big question. And where does that come from? Operating budget, or does it come from another source? So I think there are a number of people that are potential champions, Angela, around this. And I think that's to be encouraged as we move through this. And then again, back to the work of the Synod Council and the engagement of individual counselors with all of this work that's happening too. And so hopefully that will then become a huge ally in that championship work.
Finding the champions, the people supports too, is that one way of prioritizing what is needed most. If you don't have people that want to own something or have passion to run with it, then that goes back on the back burner more and other things come forward.
It would make sense to say, yeah, we're gonna put money into that, but not be able to execute on it. So that it's a matter of very much, you've got to align your human resources with your financial resources and with your leadership. Right? To say, that's where we're going and we're gonna hit that.
And the champions too, I mean, there may be some difficult decisions that have to get made, because take, for example, we're a sponsorship agreement holder. We're one of the few in Eastern Ontario. I think we're still the only one in Kingston. And so a lot of this funnels through us. I've signed, I don't know, 75 or 80 sponsorship applications, and our Diocese of Ontario Refugee Support Committee was originally set up to deal like with one family and get the furniture and do all of that sort of thing. And now we have a staff person, and thankfully we're in a partnership with the Archdiocese of Kingston. So they support part of Mimi's stipend and we support part of their stipend. But the work is like shooting fish in a barrel. And I could see where one of the things that people who are passionate about this work would say, no, this is where we need to focus our priorities, because there's never been as many displaced people in the world as there are right now. So there's a lot of things that we could do, but boy, we have some difficult choices to take as a diocese. And if the framework is saying continue to work to a balanced budget, and you have to honor that, but it does allow some room to be able to have those difficult conversations too.
The other thing that I think, and this, I've seen this provincially, that is a good example. When you bring people together, you start to find, there's always disagreements, differences of opinion, differences in personalities, all kinds of things. But what you start to do is you start to align. You start to get, common language, start to use the terms the same. You'll start finding the things that are there's 10 things we could do, but there's 3 that we all want. Let's do those. Let's focus on those and succeed. Let's win a couple. And then, so that's part of, and again, I think one of the comments that was made in the chat from the nursing world was, the assessing, planning, implementing about it, it's a fluid process. And that's part of what the framework is intended to be, is flexible, to allow us to be able to develop within. But we're not gonna sit and go, well, we're gonna blow our entire, we're overblow our budget by $1 million because we just slipped it through the cracks. No, that's not how the process works. That's not how government works. So this is about saying, how do we align around the things that are important, figure out how to do them. Whether there are things that we can do in one church, or whether it takes an area of churches, or whether it takes the whole diocese, or in some cases, takes the province.
And the partnerships, the potential partnerships that can come out of all this, and some of it, again, doesn't really take a financial lens. So we have, for example, in the diocese, back in 2014, I was approached by individuals who are faithful Anglicans, Sam Maldine from St. John's Portsmouth and the lady Dr. Sunny Pancham from St. Paul's. And they wanted to establish a fund because after the horrific attack that happened in Peshawar, they're both Pakistani. And in Peshawar or in Pakistan, which was the attack on that church and then another one, and they wanted to set up a fund to support orphans that have been orphaned from these horrible attacks and wanted to have education as the support them for their education. And so they came, can you partner with us? Is there a way we can do this? So we've been doing it since 2014. There's the Pakistan Youth Education Fund, which they raise the money, but because we have that consolidated trust fund that generates, what, about 6%? Generates about 5% a year. They have now raised, they're a separate incorporated entity. They have their own charitable. So they raise and receive the money, but it's housed in our consolidated fund. And that means it draws 5%, and that 5% goes to pay bursaries right now. And I'm the president of the organization. And so we meet twice a year, and we're able to support 14 children at the Christian Technical Training School in Gurjamala, Pakistan, with full ride scholarships. Because of that work, that's a partnership that we have. It doesn't cost us anything other than the accounting work that Joyce would do, I would believe, Alec, that would be about it, around just that particular fund. And when the money comes in, the request is to draw from it and the work that needs to be done. There's a partnership right there that the Christian Cultural Association of South Asia, which is a national organization, is partnered with us in that work. So people who are outside of our Anglican world totally understand that we have made it possible for 14 children every year to receive full ride scholarships in technical training so that they can actually go and be productive members of their families. Those are the kinds of things that we're able to do, and the partnerships are there. So that's beyond a lot of this work just in-house. These are some of the things that we're doing that I doubt many people know of, because it's just something that we worked out when Sam and Sunny came into my office in 2014 and said, this is what we want to do. And so we're able to help. And that's something I think that builds into those kinds of prioritizations.
We are coming up to the 2-hour mark. I would like to check on the call. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody else in the room?
Probably like that.
Well, that's the advantage of 2 hour meeting. It's like hockey practice. By the time you're done. So let me again reiterate, thank you to all those that, and I know many of you have been part of both meetings. This is very much a chart our way forward exercise, and recognize that it's changed. Recognize that it's changed by itself, but it's also things that we work as we go. And so this post-COVID, just we were talking about this, how many times we've been able to have a diocesan meeting? As we've had 2. We've had more online, but to actually give you the opportunity to sit in the room. It has been a while since we've been able to sit in the room together. And so part of that is bringing people together. The other thing that's great is that some of the faces in the room and on the call aren't, the warden and treasurer calls, there's a pretty sort of steady, typical audience. If people come, people go. There's usually 50 to 60 or so on the call. Out of about a group of about 80. But there's people that have been on part of these meetings. And I'm presuming that's because some are Senate delegates, but not a warden. But there's people who get. The more people we get engaged, the more conversation we have, more questions, the more, and then the better we get. And we will figure out as we go, because if we can't figure the process out, how do you figure what you're trying to do out? can't figure out how we're gonna have a conversation about getting where we wanna go, but where we wanna go, we can't figure out how to do it. So I think this is good all the way around. And we will continue this as we map it through in the coming weeks. If you have other questions or thoughts, shoot them in, drop them in an email. One of the other things that's nice that's happening is people are actually dropping in the office again. You actually get to see people. And, you know, we actually have some treasurers that still like to walk in the door and put a check down. And so, again, always happy to see people and have conversations. That's right. We're always happy to see money. So with that, then, Bishop, can we turn back?
Thank you, and please continue to uphold, as Michael Lambert is commenting here, all of this is upheld in prayer. And please uphold our diocese in prayer over these next few weeks as we prepare for the Episcopal election. The candidates will be announced tomorrow. Uphold them. I can tell you by experience, it is stepping into a crucible. And I have immense respect for those who respond to that call and are prepared to place themselves in that crucible and to take that step. So please uphold them and the Synod delegates in prayer. And as we continue to work through all of this, but let's all, as good Anglicans, before we part, say the grace. For the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God, fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be with us all evermore. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Safe home.
Thanks, Alex.
The call.